Thank you, Mariana. It's great to be here. Indeed, I will present some preliminary results achieved within the frame of a research project called RITA-RANNE, RITA Migration, which is funded by Estonia Research Council, but which is carried on in very close cooperation with various ministries, including Ministry of Education, Ministry of Culture, and Ministry of Interior and Social Affairs. And well, just a few points about this research project. There are a few main arguments and main research questions. I'm interested, first of all, in these two. First, we do believe that the precondition for integration in Estonia is the emergence of a unified Estonian language-based education system. And the research question we are trying to tackle within this project is what are the best integration models suitable for Estonian societies. And to be more specific, this project is divided into various research teams or work packages, and I'm in charge of the work package number 4, which is specifically dedicated to the questions of multiculturalism and cultural diversity, and it's a group of humanities scholars, and when one of our main aims is to offer a few new tools let's say new conceptual tools, how to make sense of multiculturalism and integration in Estonia. I would maybe just start with reminding you of some very, I would say, even banal phenomena that tends to be forgotten, however. Namely, on the one hand, integration is something that is absolutely normal, and I would even argue constitute a feature of contemporary societies. And therefore, it's not about problem solving, it's about everyday life. It's a very outcome of our contemporary dynamic and complex societies. And the same applies to the concept of multiculturalism. We are all multicultural, whether we are aware of it or not. There is no genuinely homogeneous culture in the contemporary world, and the main difference is about how we cope with this reality and how we conceptualize this. Now, of course, the key question in this discussion about multiculturalism is the concept of culture. And we very much rely on the work of Professor Rein Raud, member of our research team, arguing that culture is a sum total of the resources available to people for making their life world meaningful. So culture is about meaning-making processes. And we argue that this meaning-making processes boil down to two main systems, producing texts and doing different kind of practices. So text in a very wide sense of the word, it's about sign systems, including not only written text, but also artistic or musical or other kind of texts. What is also important that culture is made by individuals via those meaning-making practices, and so it's not that we have a pre-existing cultural communities. No, it's from bottom up, and therefore identity is not defined by those cultural communities, but rather cultural communities are defined by individuals making up these communities by sharing texts and practices. And finally, what already has been actually told is that we consider cultures as dynamic and constructive phenomena which are constantly changing. Now, our point of departure was how to make sense of contemporary society, Estonian society, in terms of collective identity. Again, we start with this quite obvious distinction that, again, at least in Estonian context, tends to be forgotten, that we should speak about two different types of collective identities, political and cultural identity. And political identity is very much about the civic or state identity. It's about acknowledging constitutional principles of the state and orienting within the political symbols and values of the country, etc., while cultural identity is about those practices and texts, or more specifically about common language, cultural tradition, historical experience, or culture memory. And those cultural identities are born by cultural communities made up by different individuals sharing the same type of texts and practices. This is the very simple model that I think would help us to make sense the situation in Estonia. Now, as said, every contemporary society is a multicultural society, meaning that it's an arrangement of coexistence of several integrated communities on a shared territory in which one culture is usually dominant. And now, of course, that's a key question. What is this position of the dominant culture? And to rely on the old distinction introduced by Antonio Gramsci, we could argue that there are two main types of forms of dominance. One is the hegemonic dominance. This is the situation where the culture that has provided the multicultural system with a critical mass of shared texts and practices leaves to the other carriers, to these minority cultural identities or subcultures, a free choice to share and practice anything else beside there. While, and this is maybe more frequent type of dominance, is the ideological one, where the dominant culture in a multicultural situation tries to impose its own values, texts, and practices on all minorities. And what we argue is that we truly have to figure or conceive Estonian society as one where the hegemonic cultural identity is supported, meaning that there is one dominant Estonian cultural identity which gives full freedom to other cultural minorities' identities to develop. And this means that Estonian society needs to be conceptualized in terms of different groups of cultural identities that are all related to this one hegemonic Estonian cultural identity. There is another aspect that also sometimes is forgotten, that next to multiculturalism, we have to take into account that all societies nowadays are also transcultural, meaning that we have important communities or group of individuals outside of the state borders, and this applies, of course, also to Estonia, meaning that we have, when we want to make sense of Estonia society in terms of integration, multiculturalism, we also have to include those transcultural communities, be it Estonian or other. And actually, we have to develop different tools and I would say digital infrastructure to support the contact between the, let's say, mainland or the home culture communities and the transculture communities. And this all theoretical discussion brings me to the slide that actually is somehow distorted on the picture. I'm sorry for this, but I would try to explain it. So that, let's say that this is Estonian state, this round image. And in the middle of it, we have this, this very bubble is about political identity. It's a political unity of Estonia. But this political unity is divided into various cultural communities, having in center this hegemonic Estonian culture community, which is in various relationships with other kinds of minority cultural communities. And what is important, which unfortunately you can't see on the picture because somehow it got lost, part of information, is that all those communities transcend also the very frontiers, meaning that there is a combination of different size, of different communities, different size, extending outside of the borders of the country. So this is just an attempt to elaborate the kind of model of multi and transcultural Estonian society that we want to develop further within our project. Now we already have offered a few ideas, policy advices for Estonian integration policy. So what we have to do first and foremost is to develop, on the one hand, this common political identity, and which should unite all of us living here on this very territory of Estonia, while fostering various cultural identities and therefore supporting the multiple cultural identity versus unique political identity. And we consider, of course, that in order to achieve this aim of one political and multiple cultural identities, the process of learning is the key aspect. And integration is very much about education, about learning, and therefore most of our advices are addressed to our educational system. And of course, yet another thing well known, that this integration policy has to be two-directional and has to be relational, meaning that both sides have to acknowledge each other and tries to be fully aware of often asymmetric relations that are existing between this dominant hegemonic community and the rest of it. A few other concrete advices. We believe that it is the duty of the country, of the state, to promote this hegemonic culture, which is very much also about teaching Estonian language. But it doesn't mean that it has to be imposed in order to replace the existing various cultural identities. No, it has to be considered as something that comes after existing cultural identity. Second, as already said, we have to be much more aware about those already existing asymmetrical relations within our society, and to take into account the both perceived and actual socioeconomic positions of minorities within the society. And yeah, well, this already has almost said that one of the main aims of the national education system should be to create conditions for people to acquire Estonian cultural identity next to the other identity, if it's the case, and be accepted as the political Estonians, as it would be the case. Now, a few last points about the integration policy advices. That it's quite a widespread idea that the school education is about abandoning one identity for another. This is definitely not the aim. The aim should be to foster the idea of multiple identities, and the message has to be clear both for the pupils and for the parents that the multiple identity is a cultural resource, not a problem or lack of culture. And finally, I think what should be fostered is the practice-based integration model, and very much this bottom-up integration model, meaning that instead of carrying on integration per se, it actually has to be part of various other everyday activities like various sport or other activities. So, last 3 points: what needs to be done in order to have this common home for everybody in Estonia. First, we have to be very specific on these two types of identities, cultural and political identities, which have been strongly associated since 19th century, since the nation building process, but now I think have to be separated. Therefore, in other words, it should be possible to be politically Estonian, but having a multiple cultural identity. And I believe that the most suitable model of cultural dominance in Estonia is the hegemonic and not ideological domination as explained earlier. Thank you for your attention.